Alright, in regards to allocating common cost, let's take a look at some additional ways that you guys need to know how to calculate. A common cost is a cost of operating a facility, a cost of an activity, or a like cost object that is shared by two or more users. And we need to find a way to take that cost and spread it around between those two or more users. Common costs arise because each user obtains a lower cost by sharing than they would if they had to pay it separately. Alright, so the separate cost that would result if each user operated independently. Alright, so in other words, there's kind of like a discount there, and we want to make sure we get our share of the discount. So we need to come up with a way to divvy up this common cost among the different users. The goal in doing this is to allocate common costs to each user in a reasonable way. Alright, so how do we go about doing that? Let's take an example that's listed in the textbook. We've got this guy by the name of Jason Stevens. He is a graduate from college. He has got some job interviews that he is working on trying to land. He actually gets a call from one potential employer, and they ask him to book a flight to come out for a job interview. Alright, the round trip airfare for that one job interview is $1,200 to go from home out there and back. But after booking that, he receives a call for another interview with another employer during the same time frame as the first interview. If he were to go separate in another round trip, it would be $800 to go to the second interview. But he calls and he makes some changes to his original ticket. And he basically adds a layover in for the second interview in order to accommodate that interview. And after he makes this change to the ticket, then his airfare has now gone from $1,200 for the one round trip original ticket to $1,500, which includes the layover. Alright? Either way, $1,500 is definitely better than $2,000, which would have been the ticket 1 plus ticket 2. Alright? So he's saving money for those people that are going to be reimbursing him. Now, how should he go about divvying that up? Well, we've got two different methods that we're going to take a look at. Again, this $1,500 is the cost that is represented as a common cost, and we need to somehow allocate that among these two potential employers to get them to reimburse us. Alright, so how should he go about doing that? Alright, the first one we can take a look at is called the standalone method. And basically this one we're going to be using those weights like we have seen. So we're going to determine the weights for the cost allocation by considering each user of the cost object as a separate entity to determine the cost allocation weights. So we had one ticket that was $1,200, another ticket that would have been $800, but he actually only paid $1,500. The individual costs are going to be added together. The $1,200 and the $1,200 plus the $800, that gives us $2,000. And then we're going to calculate that weight for each one and then apply that to the common cost. Alright? So using our typical weighting allocation that we have seen numerous times now, we can take the actual ticket price of $1,500 and multiply that times the weight for the first employer, which is $1,200 over $2,000, which gives us a percentage, and we multiply that times $1,500, and we would allocate $900 to the first employer which of course in doing basic math you guys can calculate that $600 is left and $600 would go to the second employer. But if you had to, you could also do the calculation where they would be getting $800 over $2,000 multiplied times $1,500. This one relates back to that fairness and equity criterion that we talked about earlier. Of course, this is a reasonable way of allocating this out, and each one of those potential employers gets their proportionate share. Okay? Easy peasy, right? Let's look at a second one. This one is called the incremental cost allocation method. This one actually ranks the individual users of the cost object in the order of the users most responsible for the common cost, and then uses this ranking to allocate the cost among those users. The first ranked user is called the primary user, and they're assigned their allocated cost up to the cost that they would have had to pay as a standalone user. Alright, so who's our first one? It's the primary. They are the ones that we would have had to pay $1,200 for the ticket. Okay? They're therefore going to get $1,200 of the $1,500. And then the other party, the second user, is actually called the first incremental user. Okay, so incremental is your key word there. Primary party is first. The second party is the first incremental user. If there are more than one user or more than two users, we would actually continue on with that. Alright, so the third user would be called the second incremental user. The fourth user would be called the third incremental user, and so on. Alright, so again, incremental cost allocation ranks the individual users of a cost object in the order of the users most responsible for the common cost, and then uses this ranking to allocate the cost among the users. The first ranked user is primary. Those after the primary are called incremental, and we number them in order. Alright, so the first employer's ticket would have been $1,200. They're the primary. The second employer's ticket would have been $800. The first or primary user gets $1,200 of the $1,500, and the remaining $300 goes to the second employer, which is also referred to as the first incremental party. Occasionally, cost allocations and contract disputes come up. I really want you guys to think about the fact that it's very important to understand how contracts are done. You guys should have already had legal environments of business and or business law by now. A lot of discussion is covered in that class in regards to contracts and how the parties are supposed to honor those contracts. When you are dealing with some type of governmental institution, the information is explicit. It is defined within those contracts. And we are discussing the fact that in those contracts, the supplier to the government is expecting reimbursement. And many times the amount that they are asking to be reimbursed for is based on costs that have been incurred. Therefore, we need to try to avoid disputes by regarding allowable cost items and how indirect costs should be allocated. And all this needs to be covered in the language. Alright, so for example, any type of federal contract, any type of Department of Defense contract, any type of Medicare reimbursements, those kinds of things, they need to be defined. Alright, so the price paid on a contract with the U.S. government will be reimbursed And most contractors have it in either one of two main ways. The first one is the contractor is paid a set price without analysis of actual contract cost data. This particular method right here frequently accompanies competitive bidding, where there are established prices for the items sold in substantial quantities or to the public. All right, so there is a process there regarding how bidding is done, and there's a set price, and that's what the purchase order is issued for, and that's what gets paid. But then there's a second one, and this is where the contractor is paid after an analysis of actual contract cost data. In some cases, the contract will state that the reimbursement amount is based on actual allowable cost plus a fixed fee. All right, these are commonly referred to as a cost plus contract. In many government contracts, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the final cost to produce new equipment. This is especially true in Department of Defense or DoD. Due to the uncertainty involved, these contracts are rarely subjected to competitive bidding, and they are then cost plus contracts. All right, so when you're a DoD supplier, you may have high-tech requirements and different things that you're having to supply the DoD with, including prototypes and design changes get asked for throughout the process. Okay, so it's kind of like an open-ended contract until everything is exactly like the DoD wants it. The suppliers are going to continue to work for them. All right, so we're just going to keep tallying up all of our costs and expenses and then asking for reimbursement. To be fair to all in the pricing of the merchandise, the government will assume a share of the risk of these potentially high costs with this cost plus contract. An allowable cost based on the agreement is a cost that the contract parties agree to include in the cost to be reimbursed. Right, so an allowable cost, it is discussed, it is explicit in the contract of how that's going to be done, how they're going to be paid, how they are going to be calculated.